Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. On the show today, I'm very pleased to welcome Shamash Alidina, very well-known author on mindfulness and related topics, maybe best known for the 2010 Mindfulness for Dummies book, which is really good and thorough, actually, but that's a while ago now. Since then, Shamash has done a lot of stuff. He's written 10 books. He's based in London. He runs online trainings for mindfulness practitioners and teachers, various other related trainings, which he might tell us about. And he co-founded the Museum of Happiness, which some of you may have heard about. So a warm welcome to you, Shamash.
Thank you, Karen. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for coming on our podcast. And this show is, of course, about yoga and meditation, mindfulness, as well as the body. And I usually begin by inviting our guests to say a bit about how they got into, in your case, mindfulness and all the other related things that you've done since.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so for me, it wasn't, I've noticed a lot of people, they go through difficulties like traumas or, really difficult mental health challenges and they end up finding themselves into mindfulness. But I got into it, 24 years ago now, and the term mindfulness wasn't even used that much, really. But my challenge was that I was doing a degree in engineering at university, and I had this idea that I was going to make a good income and do this job, and I'll just be really happy making money and spending the money. So it's just that very simple goal that I had in my life. And then I found when I did make some money in the summer vacation, I remember spending it actually in central London, Oxford Street, and just having this feeling of emptiness. And I thought, I'd almost been tricked. You need to go to school, get good grades, go to university, you get good grades, you get a good job, you make this income, find someone, and that's happiness. But I didn't feel that sense of happiness that everyone had said I would get. So I felt empty and I didn't really know what to do. And I saw a poster in the London Underground for a philosophy class. And there was a big poster, Socrates quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And I thought, that sounds like the opposite of chemical engineering, what I'm doing right now. Let me try the opposite and let's just see what happens. It took a bit of courage, actually, because it was so different to my normal everyday scientific way of thinking. But I knew I had to try something different. So I showed up and I had the most amazing experience in this first class. They talked about the power of consciousness and awareness, which made logical sense. And they said that in the East, they do these practices which can raise your level of consciousness. I thought, yeah, I guess that's possible. If we have this everyday consciousness, there may be some exercises we can do to make us more conscious. And they said that that makes you live a fuller, more meaningful life, and you get more engaged with life when you do this. And then they did this 5-minute exercise where we simply connected with all of our senses. And then they said, notice the silence beyond the sounds. And notice that there's a part of you that's observing everything, not only the senses, but there's a part of you that's observing your thoughts. There's a part of you that's observing your feelings. And there's a great peace in that, in resting there. And I had the most amazing mini experience. And it wasn't just the experience that was amazing, but it was the fact that I'm not just my thoughts and I'm not just my feelings. And I thought, oh my God, because I was just so, I lived inside those thoughts and feelings and everything. If I felt bad, then I was not feeling good, and that was the end of it. But this created the opportunity for a choice that actually, okay, I can have all these thoughts coming and going, but that's not with the clouds coming and going. I don't have to be the clouds. That was such a big revelation for me. From that day onwards, I've wanted to teach that to others. So, I studied it more and I became a school teacher where all the children do meditation and got more and more into mindfulness. And I can keep talking about the story, but essentially that was the seed. That was the initial seed that got planted. And luckily it was such a positive experience that it's given me the momentum to keep going ever since then.
Yeah, yeah, it's wonderful to have that positive experience. Currently, there's so much talk in mindfulness about um, helping people who might have trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety and depression, and
Mm,
they might not immediately have such a positive experience where it's like, oh wow, yeah, it's peaceful, calm.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, what's your take on that side of
That's
things?
a good point actually, because of I'm reminded about a story because I'm quite passionate about another thing linked to mindfulness called ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Training.
Yeah.
And the founder of that, Dr. Stephen Hayes, he was troubled with more and more anxiety. He started to get more and more panic attacks, and everything he did made it worse. Even when he did a relaxation exercise, the relaxation, he's feeling more relaxed and he's saying, "Oh, I'm feeling so relaxed. My heart's not beating fast." And then suddenly his heart would skip a beat. He's like, "Oh, be calm, be relaxed." Then his heart would start beating faster, and then before you know it, he would have a panic attack again. And this happened for 2 or 3 years, and he found himself in the middle of the night. So this is obviously a traumatic experience, but in the middle of the night, he found himself with his heart. He woke up, and his heart was kind of racing so much he thought he was having a heart attack for sure. That it wasn't a panic attack. But it turns out that it was just another level of hitting rock bottom, in which he was having a panic attack in his own home, in his own bed while asleep. But in the midst of that huge storm, he had that same experience that I shared about being the observer. Suddenly he realized at that moment, hang on a minute, I've been running away from these feelings for years and years and years, and I don't have to do that. I can have as many panic attacks as want to arise for me, but these panic attacks don't get to choose what I do, and I can make the choice rather than the feeling making the choice. And I'm going to face up to it. And he knew from that moment that his life was going to be different, and it was different. And he ended up starting a whole therapy on the back of it. So, for me, it wasn't that extreme experience, but even my sense is that even in the midst of trauma, there is an example there. And so it was almost like a spiritual experience he had. And then he thought, these must be very rare. People think of, moments of enlightenment or these spiritual insights as being, like a 1 in a million thing. But his research found that it was like, 1 in 3 or 1 in 2, 2 in 3 people have some sort of major spiritual experience which helps them to transform their lives. This sense of being connected with everything around us, or this sense of being like the observer and free from getting overwhelmed by our thoughts and feelings. So yeah, it's a little bit like when you have these storms at the beginning, at the center of the storm is this absolute peace and calm.
Yeah.
That can be also, we can sometimes tap into that in the midst of difficulties and traumas too, I believe.
Yeah, and sometimes also immediately after a bit of a shock, reminded of my Buddhist teacher. He sometimes makes like a sudden, loud sound with his bells
Yeah,
or something.
yeah,
Or he says, "Oh, if you jump into the cold sea, like there's a kind of like a moment,
yeah,
and straight after that moment, it's very clear and very calm.
yes.
It kind of cuts through everything."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's quite almost funny, some of these Buddhist or Zen Buddhist traditions where they try to kind of shock people into into waking up. I don't think we'll do that on this podcast, otherwise we might get too many complaints. But I know I've had this story of can't remember which country it was in, but there was like a Zen master who was walking up and down. And they used to have these kind of almost like and they'll whack people on their back if they're falling asleep.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so this chap was walking up and down, and this lady was falling asleep. So he kind of cracked I'm not sure if it's a whip or a stick or something. And she immediately looked at him, took her phone out, and called the police. And the police came and arrested him. So you just can't do that anymore.
No, we
It's
need
not going to work. You need to be
some
careful.
other, yeah, methods of kindness and humor, obviously. I think you mentioned that, you mentioned playfulness and fun as part of your approach, as well as this acceptance and commitment. And in terms of embodied work, we often talk about awareness, building this maybe higher level of consciousness, more awareness, and then adding choice, which you already mentioned as well, to change something about how we are. So knowing how we are and then change something about it. And so I'm quite curious about that side of your work, because it seems to be more than just mindfulness. You mentioned acceptance and commitment and purpose, community stuff. It's a big question maybe, but could you say more about really bringing it into life and helping us maybe change our lives?
Yeah. So I could talk a little bit more about the acceptance and commitment and choice and some of those other things you've talked about. So the reason I've been into this mindfulness stuff for a while, and mindfulness and meditation and teaching meditation. And the first thing that made me change my traditional way of teaching mindfulness since I first wrote that book, Mindfulness for Dummies, is that, as I started to teach it more and more, it became more and more popular, and there's more opportunities for me to teach in different places in the world. And that was fantastic. I was traveling a lot and teaching a lot. But I found myself getting more and more tired, actually, more and more worn out. And I remember coming back after a trip of working quite hard and just every day waking up feeling tired. And I thought, okay, it might be jet lag for a week or two, but it happened for another week and another week. And I thought, this doesn't look good for a mindfulness teacher to be suffering from burnout while teaching mindfulness. It's just not good for business. It's not good for anyone. So I thought, I didn't know what to do. So I thought, okay, let me just go back to bed every time I feel tired, and let's just see what happens rather than trying to force myself. So I woke up, and if I felt tired, I just lied down in bed. Felt a little bit like I was giving up, but I thought, let's try something different. And as I was lying in bed, I wasn't falling asleep. So I was kind of looking through different videos, and I came across a monk teaching mindfulness and meditation. And he was teaching for the whole 10-day retreat was on YouTube. So I didn't have to go to a retreat center. I could just do the retreat from bed. And he talked about not just mindfulness, but kindfulness. And I think maybe more people use that word now, but I think this teacher, Ajahn Brahm, he was one of the first to use that word. And he emphasized the importance of being kind to ourselves. And so if we felt tired, to sleep, rather than trying to force yourself to meditate or force yourself to sit up straight, and rather than trying to force this awakening of our awareness, let it happen naturally. Just rest your mind, and if the mind wanders, it wanders. That's fine. Just watch it doing that, and eventually it starts to settle, and thoughts about the past and the future, over time they calm. And rather than you trying to reach out to the present moment comes to you. It's like this wonderful, almost like a sun rising. And I had the most amazing meditations just lying down in my bed. I called them meditations rather than meditations.
I love that.
And that was in a way the first kind of iteration or change. So I started to teach more about kindfulness, and I took a much more friendly approach rather than trying to force yourself to be present. If your mind wants to wander, just let it wander, and then just watch it, and you'll find that the more you let it wander, the more it won't wander. The more you try to focus it on being present, the more it wants to go everywhere else on the planet. So that's one of the insights and the changes I made. Then I got interested in positive psychology, and I got involved in starting this Museum of Happiness. But then what I started to realize is that even at this organization we started, the Museum of Happiness, people were almost clinging on to the feeling of happiness. They're trying to get a certain emotion, and feeling like they're a failure if they weren't feeling good or feeling happy. It's kind of part of our society, tells us that we need to be happy all the time. And then I came across a book called The Happiness Trap. and I learned about ACT and acceptance and commitment, and how rather than focusing on creating a happier life, what's a much more helpful thing to focus on is creating a meaningful life. And this is what the research of Dr. Stephen Hayes discovered too. When we try to cling on to one emotion rather than the others, rather than us just feeling the happiness, we start to, the very emotions that we want to get rid of, we start to get hit by them more and more. And there's some research to show that if you, one of the things that can trigger things like depression is when you're trying to focus on your emotions too much. And then if you start to notice, oh, I'm a little bit sad, let me try and get rid of that. Let me listen to another podcast. And then you start to feel something else. Oh, let me go for a walk. You're trying to fix your emotions as if there's a problem with feeling sad. And when we do that, we start to become hyper vigilant of our feelings, and we're trying to make ourselves feel a certain way. And so the very feeling that we don't want to get, we end up getting. So what I find is a much more healthier approach is this ACT approach, the focus on meaning and purpose and becoming clear about our values, and then using mindfulness and acceptance to make space for all our difficult feelings. So, last week I wasn't feeling that great on a particular day, and just learning to cultivate acceptance, noticing, you talk about embodiment here a lot. So, where do you feel it in your body? Because emotions, we don't really know what an emotion is unless we can feel it in our body. So you notice where you feel it. You can even objectify it as if it's in front of you. What's the color, the shape, the texture, what happens when you feel it as you're breathing. You can even communicate with it, like, good morning, sadness, how are you doing today? Like, how can I help you? Be kind to it. You could draw it, you could dance with it, you could be much more, and you mentioned the word playfulness as well. You can relate to it in a more curious and playful way. And that's a much more healthy approach than, this is a bad thing, I need to get rid of it. It's actually a teacher for us, and it's something that we can learn from. And we often use the poem, and maybe you've shared this on the podcast before, Rumi's poem, The Guest House.
Yeah. I don't know if it's been mentioned by other interviewers, but it's used quite a bit in mindfulness trainings and books, and yeah,
exactly. And that's I think the first few lines, this being human is a guest house, every day a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor, welcome and entertain them all. So the idea is, it's a nice metaphor as well. So you've got this image of a guest house, and different people are knocking on the door, which are our different emotions, our difficult thoughts. And you can spend a whole day trying to keep the door closed.
Yeah.
You could learn to open the door and welcome them in. We're here in England, we'd probably offer them a cup of tea, somewhere else maybe a coffee, hopefully nothing too strong. You can sit down with this emotion and have a nice conversation. And I have this daily mindfulness club where I guide a meditation every day, and people do things like that, and you have these different conversations, and you might learn something from them, and learn to make peace with them. And you can do that not just with emotions, but also your mind, with your busy mind, with all of its thoughts. Like, okay, you can sit with your mind and see what the mind wants to say. So you can take this kind of creative and fun approach to yourselves and your challenges, which is kind of the approach that I take. And it feels much more natural as well, rather than you must do it this way, or meditate this way, or practice embodiment this way. You can be creative in that, and each person's different, so they find what works for them. So yeah, just to finish off with what I was talking about with ACT as well. So rather than focusing on happiness or even on mindfulness, I think a much more healthy approach is focus on what makes our life meaningful. So let's say if being kind for the listeners is a meaningful thing for them. So how can you do things kindly? How can you listen to a podcast kindly? How can you kindly share this podcast with others? How can you kindly do your work? How can you kindly engage with your children or your parents or friends? And that can be the focus of your life, rather than trying to be a certain level of happiness or same time, you can use your mindful skills when difficult thoughts come up for you, difficult emotions come up for you. And so your focus is not all about how do I get rid of this trauma, or how do I get out of this low mood, or how do I fix my anxiety. Your focus is how can I be a kinder person, and how can I use my mindful skills to help continue to cultivate that in my life. And that's what this act is about. And that's why I'm quite passionate about it, because it's not just about trying to fix ourselves. It's about learning to connect with others and create a meaningful life, and use the acceptance and mindfulness skills to help us along the journey.
Yeah, and I like that it abbreviates to ACT, which usually involves the body more.
True.
I saw a cartoon in the Ladybird book of mindfulness of this guy. It said something like, Colin loves doing his loving kindness meditation, but he's too busy to actually help his friends when they need him. So, something like that. So it brings it out of just the head space, if you like, into life.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about behavior change, actually. So there's one experiment that they've done on other people, and we do in our classes, where we say, try and stop thinking of a flying pink elephant or something. And we think we can control our thoughts, but you can't even control something as simple as that. And another one is like, you're feeling sad right now, instantly, make yourself feel better. You can't change your mood, but you can change your behavior. You can say in your head, I can't move my arms, and at the same time you can be moving your arms around. So we can control our behavior a lot more than we realize, and we can't control our thoughts and emotions as much as we think we can. So that's why it's called ACT as well. It's about taking action rather than trying to fix our moods and our thoughts.
Yeah, and sometimes it's about doing, as part of that, is doing something different with the body, like you say, lifting your arms even though you think you can't move.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually can change our state to, for example, fake a smile, or doing star jumps. If you feel miserable, it usually cheers you up, whether you want to cheer up or not. It's
I mean, even looking at you smiling right now, like, when you see somebody else smiling, it actually has that mirror neurons effect. It kind of makes you smile a little bit, and it starts to kind of shift the mood as well, which is really nice, because it starts to spread as well, doesn't it? But yeah, they're really nice examples. It's there's just another experiment just to show the power of this. So, when I said this example, don't move your arms, and I was moving my arms around, if the listeners do that as well, it creates a thing in our brain called cognitive diffusion. It creates a separation between what your mind is saying and what your body does. And so you realize that your mind and whatever thoughts that are popping into it is not fully in control. And they did this experiment where they took one group of people, and they told them to hold cubes of ice. And they said to them, just keep saying, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. Like these positive thinking, like you normally hear on TV and stuff. And they could hold it for, let's say, 30 seconds, and then they had to let it go. They couldn't do it. The other group, they did this exercise like I said. They said, say in your mind, I can't walk, I can't walk. And as you say it in your mind, just walk around the room. So they just did that for a little bit. And they gave them these cubes of ice, and they could hold them for, let's say, an average of a minute. And so they discovered that, okay, so it's not positive thinking that creates a positive change. It's actually teaching people how their minds don't have to control their behavior. They get to choose their behavior. So this is a little example of a little exercise in ACT, which is, it's actually a form of mindfulness, cognitive diffusion. You're not your thoughts. Your thoughts don't define you, but there's different ways of doing it. And there's a nice, fun way of doing it, as we've just described.
That might be popular with people who are getting into all this ice bar stuff.
Exactly. I'm not going to freeze to death. I'm not going to freeze to death. Well, you have to be careful with that. You don't get too carried away, because you would freeze to death if you stayed in the ice bath all day. So there's balance to be kept in this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I love how the science around this seems to be, really like exploding almost since maybe 2010 or so. So much research has been done to back up all the things that the yogis and Buddhists and Sufis and all of the people that have been practicing these things for thousands of years seem to already know.
Exactly.
And now we've got some MRI scans to say, yeah, they were right.
Yeah. That we were wrong with back in the past, and science has disproved it. But as it happens, some of these things, to do with mindfulness, meditation, maybe prayer and stuff, turns out they are helpful. Yeah. I was just listening to a radio program the other day. One thing that they used to do in medical science is when people were sick, they used to remove their blood, because they thought that the problem was, the reason they were feeling sick is that there's too much blood in their system. So they used to do a thing called bloodletting. I think they did that for hundreds of years, thinking it would help people get better, but actually it didn't. It's only when they did the science experiments and compared different groups, they found out it was making people worse. Yeah. So who knows, meditation could have been causing more health problems than benefits, but as it turns out from the science, it's actually really, really healthy.
Yeah, I think for some people, with things like trauma, it does take a particular approach, which can vary from person to person as well, can't it? In terms of what works for any individual at any given time.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why you can do all the science in the world, but every single person's different, right? And just because it works for 99% of people doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. And so each person needs to try and observe for themselves what's working for them. For some people, just listening to this podcast regularly and of the different speakers, that might be transformative. And for another person, that might not be helpful at all. Being creative through painting could be a really healing for one person. For another person, it might be dance, or it might be none of those things, just meditating. So we're all very different. And that's the great thing about what you're doing and finding different speakers, is that you're getting a little bit of different approaches, different styles, different voices, different personalities, and you may find something that works for you. So no, I love that about this, and it's something that we should respect. Every person's different, and just because it's working for us, we shouldn't force it upon other people. It may not be right for them.
Yeah, and I think often kind of bringing obviously more awareness to how I am in a practice, and can give me information as to how to proceed, or whether something isn't quite working in terms of making me feel at least a bit better in the longer term.
Yeah.
In terms of acceptance, being a big part of what you've been talking about, it can be quite a long process, or at least in my personal experience. Again, it might be similar to some of the examples we've talked about, where my head wants to accept something unpleasant happened, or my life's suddenly a bit messed up, or I'm ill. And even though I want to accept, there's a lot of resistance that I can feel in my mind, and sometimes in my body as well, tension. Mm-hmm. So how do you work with that? Any advice?
Really great question. And as you know, you're not alone in that. In fact, acceptance is one of the hardest things to achieve. And so first of all, being kind to ourselves and compassionate to ourselves. If you've had some either small or difficult experience in the past, or you're going through certain emotions and it's just really hard to accept them, being kind with ourselves and forgiving of ourselves is the first step. Secondly, one nice thing that, because let's say we have this difficult emotion and we're trying to accept it, we need to acknowledge that we don't want to accept it because it's unpleasant, and that's natural to feel that way. So that's another thing to kind of realize, like, why would we want to accept something which is really uncomfortable, or some past experience we haven't really enjoyed? It's understandable that we don't want to accept it. What can help in terms of motivation for acceptance is our values. So let's say if your values is doing things in a creative way, it's only if you can accept the past and what's happening now that we can move forward in our lives and continue to act creatively and do things in a creative way. So as we start to become clear about our values, that can help to give us some energy and some drive and some motivation. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. And then in terms of how to accept, one tip is, it's interesting because you mentioned the resistance there. You said, let's say you had a certain experience that you'd had in the past and you want to accept it logically, but then there's another thing there, resistance. And so the struggling to accept that core emotion is one thing, but then there's this resistance there too. So rather than working on that core past experience and trying to accept that, you can actually work with the resistance too. So you can actually, take your time. It needs to be in a nice, peaceful, calm place where you feel really safe. So give yourself time to find that space. And then, meditation to get into a good state of mind too, or as best you can. And then actually notice, where am I feeling that resistance in my body? You can actually ask yourself that. Only needs to be for 10, 15 minutes, or might be longer, might be less. You can do it several times a day if you want, but just notice where it is in the body and then go through the senses. Like, what does it look like? What does it sound like? Does it have a scent? Does it have a texture? Or does it have a shape? And so you can start cultivating a sense of curiosity for this resistance. And then straight away, you're not fighting with it, you're learning from it. Because what we do is we end up having an internal tug of war with our experiences. And one metaphor used in ACT is like, imagine there's a monster on one side with one side of the rope, which is your past experience, and you're on the other side with this rope, and it's pulling you and you're pulling back, and you're just continuing to fight back and forth. And in between the two of you, there's a big hole. Now, as long as you keep pulling hard, this monster's pulling back on the other side, and you can imagine the struggle and the fight and the resistance and all that. And so we think the solution is to try and win this battle with this monster. So we just try pulling harder and harder, but the harder we pull, the harder it pulls back. Think about it for a moment before I give the answer. I'm asking the listeners as well. Just take a moment to think, what is the solution to this? Okay, you're pulling on one side, the monster's pulling on the other. There's a big hole with scary monsters at the bottom. The solution is actually to drop the rope. As soon as you drop the rope, as soon as you let go of that rope, you don't need to fight with that monster anymore. You just let it be as it is. You don't try to win that battle. And sometimes just that metaphor, that little story I've just shared now, the idea of dropping the rope can actually really help. And you can actually say that to your mind, like, just release the rope. And you're stopping that tug of war with your emotions. And that can be helpful too. So there's a couple of ideas for cultivating acceptance. And also all the things that the other speakers, I'm sure, talk about, things like, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, mindful walking, going in nature, drawing, painting, dancing, any creative activity you enjoy. All these also help with that. Going to bed on time, doing some exercise, all these. There's no one thing that's do this and then you've accepted. But I guess they're slightly more direct, some of the things that I've shared. Cultivating acceptance.
What stood out for me a bit was making some space and time for it, because I'm often a bit like, right, let's just accept this so I can move on.
Yeah. Another thing I forgot to mention is the word acceptance can be quite a hard one and not feel right. So, you can think about different words, like to acknowledge is another word that's used. Make room. So you don't have to accept it, you just need to make room for it. or make space. I quite like that. So I don't have to accept the emotion, but I can make space for the emotion, or be open, or just be curious. So you don't have to think that I've got to accept it. Think about what would be the right words or language that feel good for you. And maybe I quite like the idea of making room or making space for these feelings, rather than I have to fully accept it. Yeah. That can help too.
Yeah. And the other area I was thinking of asking you about was the community aspect. I think, you're probably one of the first people, even before pandemics and so on, to do a lot of online training and building community. And you mentioned that online retreat you happened to find with Ajahn Brahm.
Yes.
And that, at the moment, a lot more stuff is online. So how are you seeing, like, community's always been a part of traditionally of mindfulness practice. How are you managing to cultivate that?
That's a nice question. Yeah, I think it's a really important part of mindfulness, and it's an important part of living. Actually, I think we're such social beings. I heard this amazing thing actually. So human, compared to other animals like even apes and stuff, we've got whites to our eyes. We've got the main part of our eye and our iris, but then there's white parts to our eye. And the reason for that is actually linked to how social we are, because when a mother and baby's together, you can actually sense, the baby can sense if the mother is looking directly towards the baby, because there's the whites of the eye, and then there's the center of the eye itself. So it's so wired into our physical body, you can actually even see it within our eyes. So we're greatly social beings, and so practicing things like mindfulness together or other well-being practices together is really, really powerful. Now, when I first got into trying stuff online, I was doing more stuff in person, but in 2013 someone suggested that I try teaching mindfulness online, and I was very skeptical. But when I tried it, I actually discovered you can have this amazing sense of connection. Like right now, we have this amazing connection as we're having this conversation on Zoom. But also, when I was teaching mindfulness and teaching groups, there was this amazing sense of coming together. People who were quite isolated, people who had disabilities, people who were couldn't really afford to go into in-person trainings, people who are in some tiny village somewhere, and to go to a mindfulness training would have to travel a long way. Suddenly it became accessible. And secondly, kind of connected to this international community of people in all different parts and from different cultures, and you learn from each other. And so I really, really enjoyed it. The people that participated really enjoyed it. And so I continued to cultivate these online communities and teach people online. And that, and people say that enjoy it. And then in the middle of the pandemic, obviously there was a great sense of isolation. We're still in the midst of it, I guess. But when there was these very extreme lockdowns where we couldn't really hardly go out at all, it's really hard to kind of feel that sense of connection. And so I decided to, just for an experiment, just for a month, just to offer a mindfulness meditation, and a group of people come together and we just commit to 1 month. And we did it every day for a month. So it was a big commitment, including weekends, but there was nothing else to do. There was a lockdown. So I thought I should be able to do it. And then they all said, oh, we want to do it again. And so we started to cultivate this community, but people's videos were off. Like, it was too early in the morning for me to have video on for me as well. So we kept the video off, but just people chatting in the chat box. We started to cultivate friendships, and people started talking about the difficulties they're going through, and other people were sending them supportive messages. And so we've continued it. It's become 2.5 years now. And now I'm really loving is that I don't have to guide it every single day now. Other community members or other mindfulness teachers also guide it. And so that strengthens the community. That's the real heart of community, not like one leader who has authority, but everyone together contributing towards a shared goal. And so, there's a lot of isolation and loneliness in the world right now. And so not only does it help you to do your mindfulness practice regularly, it also helps you go from isolation to community, to learn new things, learn about new events, and to give the opportunity to support each other. When you're going through a hard time, others can support, and vice versa. Communities building at the moment. So I was quite involved with Facebook, but now I've got involved in a private community network. It's called Mighty Networks, and it doesn't involve any adverts. There's no algorithms there, and you kind of are responsible for the relationship with your community members. So that's really, really nice, because it feels like you're much safer, and you don't hear, you hear a lot of negative reports about social media and the problems with it. But this is a community building platform. Although it's online, it's great. We get to know each other, you get to know how far or close they are, and then we definitely will do more in-person events. They'll be probably outside for safety reasons, but eventually, when it's safe enough, we'll do indoor events too. But yeah, we're going to be doing some forest bathing. Have you heard of forest bathing?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to be, someone's a teacher who's worked with children forest school, and she's also done some forest bathing training. And so and that's a nice thing to do, in these times when it's more safer to be outside rather than inside. So so you start to learn new things and meet new people and learn new skills through that as well. So,
So can you say what forest bathing is for people who haven't heard of it?
Well, I'm not an expert. I'm about to experience it myself. I was gifted a book on it. I think I haven't got it on me, but it's a Japanese concept, and I think it's been practiced for hundreds of years, if not more. And it's about as we connect with the nature that surrounds us. So rather than just I'm going for a walk and maybe being on your phone or listening to something, you fully immerse yourself in nature, and you give yourself time to really connect with the trees and the plants and the grass and the weather, whatever it may be. Just dress appropriately, and to really take your time to cultivate that relationship with nature, because of just like the trees are part of nature, we're part of nature too. Our physical body literally comes from food and the earth, and so we can start to rekindle that relationship. And in a way, that's a way of fighting climate change from the inside out through, there's external things that we can do, but helping people to cultivate this love and connection for nature is like an internal transformation, right? And when you feel connected deeply in that way, you may naturally want to do certain things to make sure we look after our planet too. And who knows what effect that would have on other people. So yeah, it's about mindfully connecting with nature, which I think is such a healthy thing to do. Another interesting thing that's happened through these daily meditations I guide is that often they end up being nature themed. Because today, as we're recording this right now, it's the full moon today. And so we had a quote from Rumi about the full moon, and we did a visualization as if, we walked through a forest and we sat down by the edge of a lake, and we imagined the sun coming down and the moon coming up and looking at the stars, and we meditated in our minds in that way, and people loved it. So it's powerful to be in nature, but the lucky thing is that even if we're in a city, the power of our imagination can be so powerful that even visualizing being in nature is quite therapeutic and healing as well. So it's another thing, another valuable practice that people listening, I think they'll really enjoy, especially someone who's been through difficulties and trauma. To visualize being in nature can be so soothing if you can't be there in person.
And what I noticed as well, when I'm in a city now or somewhere where there isn't that much nature, I start to notice nature a lot more. Like I'll notice the squirrels in London, or the weeds and the bit of green that is there. And sometimes there's much more nature than I give the city credit for, and it's just because I haven't paid attention.
Yeah, apparently London has 50% parks. Do you know that?
No, I didn't know
It's a lot. I think it's one of the highest potentially one of the highest in the world. Yeah. So we don't realize how fortunate we are in some cities. There's quite a bit of greenery there too.
Yeah. And I think in terms of embodiment, connecting to the body of nature, the body of the earth is part of a lot of these practices. And as you say, there's so much medicine in that for humans as well as the broader ecology.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of all link together, don't they, in some ways? I think one
Yeah.
of these forest bathing practices we talked about, embodiment, is to just take your shoes and socks off and really connect with the grass and with the earth. That's probably such a good practice for embodiment, because you're really connecting with your senses through your feet, and I don't know, there might be some neutralizing effect that comes from that. So yeah, and
I've heard it being called vitamin G, the vitamins from the ground.
oh,
That's quite a nice
yeah,
expression.
yeah.
So yeah. So you've mentioned your daily meditations that I think people can find on your website, which is shamashalidina.com.
That's right.
Yeah, the links are always shared in the podcast notes wherever you find us, on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, etc. What else have you got kind of coming up or regularly occurring that people might be interested in knowing about?
Yeah, so regularly occurring, one of the members of our daily mindfulness club is a Tai Chi Qigong practitioner. And so he teaches a free class every Sunday morning UK time, 9 a.m. on Zoom. So just send me a message through our website, and you're welcome to come along to that free. He's been doing it through the pandemic too, so more than a year. And now he's doing a little teacher training for our community as well. So that's actually starting very soon. So teaching people, and I've just realized, I think that probably links to embodiment in a big way. Through doing mindfulness through movement is a great way to come into the here and now and to connect with our bodies and our thoughts and feelings. So that's one thing that happens regularly. And there's two communities that I've started. So one of them is the dailymindfulnessclub.com, which is for your everyday person. And then I've started a new one, which I absolutely love, for mindfulness teachers. It's called Teach Mindfulness Academy. And that's for anyone who's done any kind of mindfulness teacher training that wants to learn two things: either how to be more confident teaching, and secondly, how to do some marketing, but in an authentic way, because that's always really difficult to kind of put yourself out there. And that's been, again, so fun to see these different teachers wanting to do really meaningful things, like, teach mindfulness in nature to people, or help to kind of improve diversity in mindfulness, but didn't have the confidence to share that. So that's another community that some people might be interested in.
Yeah, great stuff. There's a lot of mindfulness teacher trainings out there. We've got one, you've got one, and I personally, I like the idea that it becomes a very community-led. Obviously, people need some guidance and training and support, and then then it doesn't have to be just one teacher, or this guru-led model can become much more community-based, which makes it more accessible in places like schools.
Exactly. Oh, that's a really good way of saying it. Yeah, I love that. I much love that. And that seems more natural with mindfulness, isn't it? Rather than being led by a particular teacher or teachers, this sense of together as a community, we're spreading greater awareness and compassion in the world. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And also, as usual, I ask all our guests, you've already given us some ideas and little things to try out, but if you have anything you'd like to share with the listeners, a tip or a little practice that
Yeah, like this
really
is what
like?
comes to mind. So what I've discovered, even in my own personal practice, it's quite hard to do a whole meditation every single day, or you might be doing it for a while and then you feeling sick one day and you might drop the habit. Some listeners may be able to, but it's quite a hard one. So what I've discovered is it's much better to make it really, really simple. And what helped me to keep it going every single day is to reduce it to just one mindful breath. And that can be your meditation. Anything more is a bonus. So one tip is that when you wake up in the morning, one thing that most people do is that their feet touch the floor. You make your first contact. You embody, yeah. So you can actually say to yourself, good morning. Today is going to be a mindful, kindful, and lucky day, or something, whatever kind of values come to you. And then you can just take one mindful breath, and then you can do more. You can do a whole meditation after that if you want, but just that sense of contact of feet with the floor. If you do that a few times, it will become a nice habit. It will hook onto that. The habits usually link to another action. So after your feet touch the floor, you can say to yourself, good morning, whatever your name is. Not good morning, Shamash. Good morning, whatever your name is. Today is going to be a embodied day, if that's your value, if that's what's important to you. Today is going to be a mindful day. I like the idea of cultivating some luck as well. I just like that. So I say mindful, kindful, grateful, and a lucky day. Something interesting or fun will happen. And then I may take a mindful breath or two or more. And I also do this daily meditation. So I meditate because if I'm with a community, it's much easier. So you can be part of whatever community, my one, your one. Being part of some kind of community is a nice thing to do as well. But there's a nice 10-second exercise that I think everyone on the planet has time for. Everyone has 10 seconds. And you can just have that thought when your feet touch the floor. So you can have no excuses. I don't have time for that one.
At least then I can tick, I've done a practice.
Exactly. You can tick the meditation box with that.
I find that satisfying.
Yeah. I've got a consistent daily meditation practice of one breath. Big tick.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise and fun tips. So if you want to link up with Shamash and everything his communities are offering, shamashalidina.com. And thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for all that you're doing. It's a real pleasure. I love the creative and relaxed conversation. It was fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you.